If you feel like something is missing in your relationship, that might be a sense of self, yourself. You've lost yourself in relationship. So what's missing is you. And that's a very painful place to be. Now, this video is about how hard it is to talk about yourself when you are not here, which I know sounds a bit confusing, but what we mean by losing ourselves in relationship is that our energy center shuts down. Imagine like there's a grid of energy, the electric grid for parts of a city that light up, and you might have some electricity and light somewhere else in different sectors of your brain, sectors of your life, work, interacting with friends, taking charge of what you need to do to be a good neighbor, all of the ability to just run your household. But when it comes to intimate, vulnerable relationships where you need to practice allowing yourself to be seen and allow yourself to give and receive intimacy and emotional openness, many of us in that area shut down. And if we're visually seeing this grid of energy across the city, the lights turn off and it's dark in that sector. Now, usually, not all the time, we have moments where it's bright. We have moments where we're functioning. We have moments where we're practicing emotional openness. But if life gets too stressful or that request and demand for emotional connection is too confusing or too great, one way that we manage the intensity of that vulnerability and intimacy is that we shut down. This generally is not a choice. It's a trauma response to attachment trauma. And some of us are very confused about that word trauma because we're not quite able to put our finger on what are we talking about? Where did that come from? Usually, what it means is that you have some history of emotional neglect. And the word neglect means an interruption and an absence, a withholding or a withdrawal of emotional availability and presence and care. Usually, for many of us, we're thinking our early ages of infancy and childhood, being a toddler, the very, very delicate early years, connecting with a parent, with a caregiver. And many things can happen in life for the parent that interrupts their ability to be present to the child. The most obvious one is exhausted and tired and working, overworking, needing to put food on the table and being pulled in many directions. The other can be some challenge of mental illness, mental health is compromised, which means they're not fully able to give to the child because they can't even give to themselves. And then, third, and perhaps some form of addiction that's really getting in the way of the parent being available and present because they have been pulled into an addiction that disconnects them from themselves. And they are pursuing a very hungry addiction to find connection in a world where they also themselves are struggling, feel hurt and feel lost and going without connection. So they're depleted, they're distracted, and they do not have it within them to give to the child. If you have been on the receiving end, if this is your history, my history also linked to this, related to this, is like my father, who was adopted at age 5, had some connection with the neighbor woman he called grandmother, his Oma, but she couldn't keep him. And he was given up for adoption at age 5. So he had an attachment wound and he had his own challenges of what it means to be given up at age 5. And then that history, that intergenerational trauma, influenced our family, influenced me as his son. And then included on top of that were other circumstances that over time I experienced some form of an obstacle to getting emotional needs met. And that obstacle showed up so much that it coded itself developmentally into my brain and nervous system and attachment system as a kind of attachment trauma, which means when there is vulnerability, when there is intimacy, and needing to voice needs, receive another person's needs, stay present and show up, and to uphold that my needs and my being loved is valued, I disconnect from that value and I implode. If you know what I'm talking about, that disconnect is the experience of losing ourselves. And in the face of constant invitation for emotional connection when you are in relationship, and given the depth and the degree of that closeness that emotional relationship can provide, we struggle to maintain a solid sense of self when we are faced with that depth of intimacy and vulnerability. And what happens is we lose ourself. And when this happens enough, you disconnect and lose your ability to name your feelings, to name your preferences, to have a voice, to assert your own needs. So what does it mean? What are we talking about to lose ourselves? This energetic implosion of your energy source. You're disconnected from an energy source. And we start to inventory that there's some history here of emotional neglect, whatever that looks like for you, an emotional disconnect that impacted how reliable you think getting your emotional needs met is going to deliver. There's some conclusion as you get older, you start to conclude or fear abandonment and fear rejection when you've had to work so hard to hang on to what you did get. And this sets up this thinking of a scarcity model, this thinking of the opposite of abundance. It's the opposite of nourishment, which is accepting minimal crumbs of relating. So we have the original emotional neglect that happened in some form, some capacity, to certain degrees over a period of time developmentally. And as a result, we become very hyper focused. If you're hungry, and if you've been hungry for a very long time, you have a very heightened awareness of where food is when food is offered, and if food is free and available. And when it's not, you are on hyper alert and looking out for, when might I find some food, some emotional nourishment if we're talking about relationship. And when you do meet someone and you get some connection, your brain immediately draws the compare and contrast and say, well, be careful, don't get too used to this, because you know what it's like when it is denied you, and you know what it is like to spend many years starving. And we can change the word starving to longing. We're longing for connection. Same way, maybe perhaps your caregivers were longing for something in their life. And we build this tolerance for going without. And yet we also simultaneously then are fearful of, if we would receive some connection, some emotional presence, some vulnerability, some warmth, some relationship, or here we're also using the example of nourishment and food. We get a little bit of food, we are very quickly going to be concerned that the food, the nourishment, the emotional connection is going to go away. And so we have developed a fear of it going away, a fear of abandonment, a fear of rejection, that you're going to change your mind and not want to be in a relationship. The third area of focus is that we've internalized these beliefs so that we believe we are not worthy of being known. And so, therefore, we also don't invest in knowing ourselves. It's a perpetuation of the trauma pattern, internalized, what's called trauma reenactment and repetition compulsion, not only with other people, but through our own thought processes. We reinforce the disconnect and talk ourselves out of getting emotional needs met. And we do that so much that we also have developed internalized negative shaming speak that talks us out of taking a risk and revealing ourselves and asking for more, or practicing languaging that which is very hard to language. For some reason, emotional connection is, it eludes us because we're going against the rules that say do not speak up for what you need. You will be rejected, you will be punished, you will be embarrassed. It's not safe to need connection. It's not safe to need another person. It's not safe to need help. It's not safe to need love and warmth and emotional attunement where you feel fully received, but simultaneously uplifted, because there is this synergy and exchange that's the power of relationship. Sometimes we get a little taste of it, but we don't have the skill to sustain it, or we pick a partner who doesn't have the skill to sustain it either. And in the early stages of meeting someone, our ego defenses and our fears, and even maybe something about the attachment trauma sometimes, not always, but sometimes, can soften, and it can go into a remission, so that we are able to practice a form of connection relating when our, what's referred to as our ego boundaries soften. And that's those moments, those times when people say, when they just met someone and they say, like, oh, I feel like we've known each other for years, or I feel like we just finish each other's sentences. And it's so easy. Now, a lot of this, just so you know, and I think you probably know this, that usually this is a very grand hormonal cocktail where your brain is lying to you and your brain is really trying to very much override any fears that you have in connecting. Because through evolution, that the power of the attachment system is that for purposes of continuing the species, procreation, the brain is designed in those early times of infatuation and complete lust, and to be drunk on the other person, what we call falling in love. It seems to satiate and disarm the attachment trauma mechanism from showing up. And we have an experience of a few months, 3 months, 6 months, however long it is, where we feel okay and we feel like we're connecting, and we feel that feeling of attunement that I talked about. And unfortunately, the hormonal cocktail wears off, and attachment trauma, the ongoing level of the riskiness of emotional commitment kicks in. And we, back to that energy grid that gets, the electricity, the cord gets pulled out of the socket, or if it's the energy grid across the city, we can just see parts of our life, parts of ourself, parts of our brain, our executive functioning starting to, like, just close off. And maybe you know that trauma symptom when you're trying to, and you, uh, and the words just are not there. Even though you have memory that the day prior or 5 days prior or just who you are, that you do know what you're talking about. You do know this experience. But when it requires simultaneously leading from the place of emotional need, and that is also the place where the wound lives or the wound originated, it becomes exceptionally hard, doubly hard to be able to explain that to another person, let alone explain it to yourself. And remember, I said usually this happens in our earlier years. That's possible. That what happens, what we call age regression, where we're not our current adult self. We become a younger version of ourselves, maybe even go back to the origin of the time, the age we were when the most impactful parts or most impactful aspect of the attachment trauma unfolded. And you find yourself all of a sudden trying to be in an adult relationship, but you're acting like a 7 year old, or your brain is perceiving information and taking in information and channeling it through the meaning and language center of a 7 year old or 8 year old or 9 year old, doesn't matter the age, but usually it means we don't feel we're fully we're operating in our fullest capacity of executive functioning as adults, but in fact it feels like something is missing or that we're handicapped. Now, if you lose yourself in relationship, and I hope the style of this video speaks to you, because what we need to learn how to do is be direct and be specific, and over time also educational. Not only educate ourselves, but we need to educate those around us to say, hey, wait a minute, I think that I have some history of an attachment wound that seems to hijack my brain and my nervous system, and my energy source shuts down when I'm trying to practice giving and receiving emotional, vulnerable connection. And many times, if you're talking to someone who has no idea what you're talking about, they're going to look at you like you are purple and have 5 heads. And how do I know this? Because that's been my experience. But I know something's going on here, and we have got to begin to language and say, can we please talk about the origin, the history of emotional neglect? Can we please be real open about a shared reality that many of us have called fear of abandonment? And fear of abandonment creates what is called attachment distress. And attachment distress is a fancy word linked to attachment and relationship that is really about anxiety. And if it really gets amplified and turned up, we call it primal panic. Primal panic is this innate core bottom reptilian brain feeling an urgency that if I am disconnected from those I love, and if I don't feel a secure bond, I enter survival mode, and my life, my survival is at stake and being threatened. And if you have this experience where your primal panic activates as a result of attachment distress that is just built up, and it's too much and it's too much, and you're trying to interact with an adult partner as an adult, but all of a sudden you are now in the middle of an activated primal panic, you are going to present like extreme response, and the other person might have no idea, where is this coming from? Why are you having a temper tantrum that looks like you're age 3? Why are you slamming doors? Why are the stakes so high when it comes to us talking about our emotional needs? And the response is, because this, for me and my nervous system, the way my brain works, and the fact that I have a fear of abandonment, and that I really don't believe that I matter in relationships, that even the slightest bit of connection, when it disconnects, or it's taken away, or it's withheld, what's going to happen is this primal panic kicks in as an extreme emergency. And right now, my nervous system is flooded. And there's this very, very big imperative that says you and I must repair connection. And if we don't repair connection, I am going to die. Or at least so that's the way the hormonal cocktail is trying to convince me in my bloodstream as I shake and vibrate. You might know this. Many of us with attachment trauma, when we're trying to negotiate our needs, and especially if it's a difficult, challenging, tension filled, an argument, maybe a difficult conversation, and you're trying to do your best to explain what's going on, and you might find that you start to this feeling, the vibration of extreme fear. And we have to practice taking a breath. We have to practice name reality. I'm losing myself again. I I I I so cannot retain and maintain an objective, centered sense of self with ego boundaries, differentiation, the ability to be an individual, to accept influence, but yet also to reveal that I do have a need that I would love to invite you to meet that need, or to we can meet those needs together. The stakes, however, with this history of emotional neglect, fear of abandonment, a belief that you don't really matter anyway, your needs are so unimportant, the chances of us successfully communicating this to a partner are rather low. And if you're like me, you will spend years and years, spend decades trying to make sense of all this for yourself behind the scenes. And what we often do, and this is clients I work with now, what we're constantly coaching is trying to practice. You have to learn to voice it. You have to learn to explain what is the thing that's happening so the other person knows, but also so you can talk yourself through it. And you're strengthening your ability to show up as an advocate. You're strengthening your ability to make those neural connections where there usually has been a disconnect of voice, where you start to practice and finding voice. I mean, why do I even make these videos? Because it helps me practice naming what's going on, because I still know what it's like to be in relationship, and when it requires a certain degree, a certain risky openness, an emotional openness, a vulnerability, something can happen in my brain that just cuts me off from explaining, oh, yeah, my attachment trauma activated, and I'm experiencing attachment distress and anxiety, a heightened anxiety that has moved into primal panic. And I'm really getting ready to uh, yell and scream and jump up and down and slam cupboard doors and have a meltdown. Some of us have meltdowns in this particular play. It's very intense. Now, what happens also after we have a meltdown is we feel so embarrassed. And oftentimes there's this incredible, oh, I can't believe that I did that again. Or there's also this shame that's not funny. It's taken me many years to learn how to laugh at it, because that's a healing tool, and to put it in perspective for ourselves and for the other person, to say this is not a big deal. It's really not a big deal. I'm not the only one who has attachment trauma. You can go to the library and find many books on this. It's a thing, and it happens to be my thing. And you know what we need? We need consistency, reliable connection, a reliable frequency of connection that is consistent, and a sincerity in wanting to know each other, to know me, but a sincerity in emotional connection, and to value it. Now, here's what's really, please hear this one. And this is really hard for us to believe when we finally choose someone or they choose us, but there's not a good emotional connection and our attachment trauma is so present. We have to step back and really assess a, a certain number of people. I do not know the percentage, but they are not interested in what I'm talking about. Not only in a reparative sense of like, oh, hey, by the way, your partner has, some history of attachment wounds. Chances are we pick people who they also have attachment wounds, and chances are they already do because it's pretty common culturally and as a human being beyond culture, it's pretty common. This is what happens to all of us or many of us. So nonetheless, as common as it is, and how I'm pretty, we're preaching to the choir. If trying to convince me of the importance of like how I think everybody should know this information. Um, I just think it's universally necessary. My point here is not everybody wants that information and not everybody values it, and they don't care to create a relationship on the level of conscious knowing that you are trying to create for yourself or that I'm trying to create. There seems to be those of us with some history of attachment injuries. And because we know what it's like to go without, let's use the food analogy again. Because we had crap food growing up, and because we've had many nights of not having a snack or many days of not having a meal, that as a result, we have become foodies. We have become connoisseurs of good, chef kiss, good emotional nourishment. We want an entree that is satisfying, that's a real meal that offers nutrition and has a range of savory flavors and satisfies our senses. The palate, the heart's palate is fed and can taste the nuance, the range, the depth of what it means to practice emotional connection and interpersonal exchange and attunement, and to really know and be known in the context of emotional availability. We have become connoisseurs and foodies of this level of heart connection, and it oftentimes becomes challenging because those that we meet might not share in the depth of knowing, and the void that was created within us now also serves us as a expansive awareness of what's possible. The only way we know what is possible at this level is because it was like we were cleaned out or wiped out or just internally this profound void of absence. The absence of connection is the emotional neglect. And we know very intimately, and you probably could cry if I really asked you to drop down into right now, take a breath, feel that place of emotional disconnect and emotional absence, that you had to tolerate that absence. It expanded your awareness to the point where you also simultaneously, at some point, not all of us, but maybe this is you, it 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 flipped. There's this what I call inverted relating, and what the awareness of the absence became now about the knowing of the need for presence, for someone to show up. And then we were very, very heightened, very aware, heightened awareness of when those we're with don't show up. And that in and of itself is a trauma response, but it upholds a fundamental core value that says, you know what? I'm just not going back. I I'm not going to calibrate my insatiable need for emotional depth and connection to a level that we would consider a cultural middle of the road. I do know that I have a very high expansive capacity for deep knowing and emotional exchange, even though at times it's very scary and it's hard to live in that place if I'm not with someone who also can practice at that level. And it's very scary to be there because it can feel lonely. That level of knowing, the depth of emotional connection can feel very lonely because our history was one of being alone there. But also as adults, we haven't found too many people who really know how to join us at this place. Joining us at this place means I see you. I see you. Joining us at this place means tell me more. Who are you? What's going on? How can we experience that together? Joining someone at this place means they don't look away and you don't look away. And I don't mean literally, I mean your energetic presence. So it's perfectly okay if someone looks away, but I'm speaking in metaphor. This metaphor of being seen, the metaphor of being fed and receiving, and the knowing that you can reciprocate that for another person. These begin to move us in the direction of what exactly is the opposite of emotional neglect. And it's back to the consistency, a reliable frequency, and a sincerity of connecting. And the opposite of emotional disconnect, that neglect, is an emotional availability and a presence, a reliable presence. And it's enjoyable to think, someone's presence with a CE on the end is received as a present, as a gift, ENT on the end. And if you can only get that present of presence through being present. So it's a lot of doublespeak, but the path forward is seeking out relationships that offer this consistent emotional engagement and learning to recognize and trust when the engagement is reliable. A skill here, you already know how to collect evidence. You know how to collect the evidence that connection won't happen. You already know how to collect the evidence that something is wrong with you and that your needs don't matter. So if you can identify that you're able to collect negative data, negative experiences, negative evidence, the request, the skill we're trying to focus on is turn that same skill toward collecting the evidence of connection. And it's around you, it's out there. Start looking for it. Places where you do have an exchange, begin to identify it. Notice that when someone is listening, notice when someone pauses to receive you, notice when you enter the room, who looks up and greets you. Notice when someone asks you about your needs. Notice when you feel emotional warmth. What we're doing, this actively reinforces and anchors that we can practice emotional connection. Another skill here, if we're talking about emotional neglect, the opposite of experiencing some form of emotional engagement, is that if you don't have those kind of relationships, that in and of itself is a skill or an insight to say you cannot go without. Isolation is not the solution. We do need to take a risk and connect with other community sources. And perhaps empathy, I understand the obstacles. There's some real world obstacles getting in the way, but also we are hardwired to join together in camaraderie and connection. And it is possible for you to go out in the world and start being more open. Do not let the negative information that you have collected get in the way and reinforce the same old pattern. We're trying to change the pattern. Now, if we're talking about fear of abandonment and fear of rejection, there was a precedent that was set through the emotional neglect. And as I've said, it's usually developmental, that what was happening over the course of childhood, that's usually not just a one time event, is that there was that connection. You went without a connection. The opposite here is trusting that the connection is available. If you are fearing abandonment, you want to heal that. The path forward is about learning to trust in availability and presence. This means tolerating. There's a lot of discomfort that comes with letting in any kind of vulnerability and connection when it's so risky, when we care about the situation or the person, or that we want to be received. And we can't hide, we have to show up. And there's a extreme discomfort that happens, and we usually shy away from it, and that's the moment of imploding. What we're practicing doing preemptively is, instead of pulling away and instead of pushing the other person away, trying to hang out with that. Remember, I said primal panic, trying to hang out with the intensity of that fear in ways that we don't lose our mind, and that we don't start acting out through temper tantrum, and we don't start trying to argue with someone to get our needs met through the arguing. But in fact, we begin to increase the tolerance for the intensity of that discomfort. And in the process, practice being able to narrate what is going on for us. A skill here is often referred to, and I have to laugh because it just sounds like when you're training your dog, but the phrase is called learn to stay. So that part of you, that instinctual part of you, that animal nature, the dog nature, just wants to get up and leave. And we come back and we're saying, no, stay. When connection, if it is safe, if there's some form of availability being offered, you practice. You don't sabotage it by testing it. You don't sabotage it by over monitoring it. You don't sabotage it by talking it away or exiting early. What we're trying to do when connection happens is build the capacity to return to those moments and to begin to collect new evidence. And what we're doing is we're establishing contact instead of treating every rupture as proof that the relationship is over. Instead of saying, see, it happened again, instead what we're going is, see, there was a disconnect and a rupture. I find it very difficult to handle this, but I'm going to continue to breathe and work through it and return to the place where the rupture happened, which is about repair. We're learning the skill of attachment repair as opposed to attachment shutdown. And yes, we do need other people who have the skill to practice that with us. It's very possible that's not our current partner. That's very possible that's not our family. Hey, that's why people see therapists. That's why people join groups. That's why people are part of organizations. And we need to go outside of our regular circle and start practicing. Well, I need to find my people. I need to find the people who are able to arrive, connect, join, and experience a heart connection and talk about getting your needs met in ways that you never were able to talk about it. The other third item we've mentioned is that if you have a core belief that your needs do not matter, and that the byproduct of this history of emotional neglect is living with that kind of belief, well, we need to undo that belief. The opposite is that we welcome you showing up. You welcome participating in the relationship instead of taking yourself out of the relationship. You're trying to heal the core belief that your needs don't matter, and you start entertaining that they do. The path forward is learning that you're welcome to show up and that you are welcome to participate in relationship. And this means practicing the act of naming your needs and saying out loud, instead saying your needs out loud instead of suppressing them before anyone has a chance to respond. The skills here are linking a voice to the need, practicing coming online in your executive functioning and your language center, giving yourself that level of comfort that you might need. That fear that's coming up is not your current adult fear, but you're feeling the fear from that of a younger self. And you start to work with the beliefs that you don't matter and collect other types of evidence that say you definitely matter in the situation where you can reveal who you are, and you want to invite and create the invitation that the other person can reveal who they are. And we're practicing starting to experience a kind of exchange. The skill here is learning to receive. And when someone does respond to your need, building the capacity to take it in. Now, the other skill here, and I think sometimes this one sounds a little shocking or it could be harsh, but it's learning to realize that when you offer emotional connection and it's not received, that that's not a rejection. It's just not being received. That can you recalibrate the intensity of that? It feels initially like a gut punch where what you're offering is not being received. But for you to be able to put it into perspective and say, you know what, it's really okay. I don't have to lose my mind. I don't have to feel this primal panic. I don't have to get all lose myself and implode into myself when another person doesn't respond back. What this means, that information is, I can't be with this person. I don't care who they are. I need to be with other people. Now, am I advocating that exactly that means that the relationship would end? Now, for some of us, very much that's true. Like, wake up. Yeah, it needs to end. Now, also, I've done this for 23 years. I am aware of the whole range of challenges of what it means to end, and or that it doesn't quite translate into an ending for everybody. But what it does translate into is you're not going to get the meal, the nourishment, the connection, the depth of vulnerability that you're looking for. And you know this. So it doesn't matter if you choose to stay in this relationship. It does matter that you must go out into the world and find other types of relationships where you are getting emotionally fed. And if you are only focusing on this one person that hurts you so much because you're being denied connection and you're emotionally starving, well, that's about you choosing not to go out into the world and have other sources of nourishment and relationship and connection, because those people are out there in the world, and you don't need to that one relationship, that one person that's not able to offer it to you now. They do not need to be the gatekeeper to your receiving it in your life. So we're interrupting the habit of turning someone else's limitations into the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, and instead beginning to override that by saying, you know, I might not matter in this relationship, but that's not a precedent for how I can show up in other types of relationships. And that I still have that part of me that wants the mirroring of knowing and experiencing that my needs are valid and that they can be received. The last part of this video is for you to do some homework in the three categories of the emotional neglect, the fear of abandonment, and the core belief that your needs don't matter. And begin to come up with the language, the paragraph, the sentences that explain what was your history of emotional neglect, and how would you put that into a very easy to digest, easily understandable explanation so that you have it for yourself. But in the event that you ever are in a situation where you're asked or you think it's safe to reveal it, you're able to talk about emotional neglect from the point of view of an invitation to negotiate getting your needs met in the future. Because of emotional neglect, I'm looking for relationships that have a certain degree of consistent showing up for each other. Because of emotional neglect, I'm looking for a reliable frequency of sharing back and forth so that we check in with each other and we know where we're at within a reasonable period of time. And emotional neglect for me means sincerity to, there's a sincerity to want to know me and a sincerity to deepen in relationship. If you cannot explain that in your own words for yourself, and know what that means, and then also trust the vulnerability it takes to share it with another person, then you will struggle to change and create the relationships that you want and need in your life. The second one is about the fear of abandonment, is that many people are afraid to share that piece of information because it makes them needy and they think it's something that they need to hide. I'm not necessarily advocating you don't need to share it on date 1 or date 3, but at some point you need to turn the words fear of abandonment into I have some history of emotional neglect that showed up as attachment trauma. And the three main symptoms of attachment trauma are hyperarousal, intrusion, and constriction. And there's many forms that attachment distress will take. Those symptoms of trauma will show up under those three headings. But as a result, one of those symptoms is that I'm very heightened, I have a heightened awareness of when there's a disconnect in our emotional relating. And this disconnect is what we culturally, many people know as a fear of abandonment. And the most generic way to language it is that I have emotional distress that comes and goes and comes and goes and comes and goes. And it is very, very easy to manage it if we have a transparency and an openness to talk about it. And so that's why I'm bringing it up so that nobody is surprised that there's going to be every so often, once a week, once every 3 weeks, this experience in my nervous system where I get very fearful. And what it means is that we need to openly talk about emotional repair and emotional reassurance, and to acknowledge that if I hide it and keep it secret and push it and relegate it to the shadow, it is going to drive me nuts. And I'm also going to behave in very ungrounded ways. And I don't want that for our relationship. So instead, I'm being really open to say, can we work with the reality of attachment distress when it gets triggered? And we will continue to monitor it in a way that we are intelligent and we're coming at it from a place of being two adults who value being committed to a path of healing. Now, of course, you do not need to use my words, and I know my words are influenced by being a therapist, so therefore it might sound a little ridiculous. You need to turn it into words that work for you, but again, that's your homework. You're going to figure out how do you name language and come to a definition of what is emotional neglect for you and how do you explain it to yourself and others? And number two, what is fear of abandonment? And what is actually happening for you? Where does that come from? And how do you begin to work with it? The third one that we've already talked about, beliefs, core beliefs, specifically the belief that you don't matter, is we're going to start collecting evidence and data and interactions and moments that go against the evidence and data and the interactions that say that you don't matter emotionally, or if you don't resonate with that term, the belief that you don't matter, you might resonate with the term you're broken. You might resonate with the term the other shoe's going to drop any day now and you're going to go without anyway. You know, something's going to mess up the goodness. Or you might resonate with this idea that you're unlovable. Or you don't deserve relationship, you don't deserve to be loved. So that is a significant part of the healing process. And that's why this is your homework to think about what ways can you counter the messaging, the core belief that says that your needs don't matter, And that links to your worth, that you're not really worthy to be in relationship. That if you start to notice, you keep a log, you keep a journal of when you're out in the world, when someone smiles at you, when you wave at someone, when you come to work and a coworker tells you a story, or a coworker says, "Hey, I was thinking about you the other day." All of these moments are relational, and you're starting to pay attention and realize you don't have to see the world through the same lens of your needs don't matter. And you're starting to strengthen a belief. The opposite belief is you do matter, and who you are matters, and what you ask for and voice matter. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to get it always, doesn't mean that the other person will say yes. And that's why we're also strengthening the ability to say, I can handle when the other person says no. I don't need to lose my marbles and fall apart. I accept, like, yeah, that's their level of skill. They're not joining me there. So I also need to, like, realistically think about, okay, how am I going out in the world and making sure that I get fed? I need nourishment. This is about emotional food. And if we're in a relationship that feels like we're starving and there's no food, well, at some point we have to wake up and realize, well, we're also simultaneously keeping ourselves starving, and that we're perpetuating this trauma reenactment, this emotional neglect, and we're just keeping ourselves here stuck. And we need to practice, start to believe, envision, imagine a world where we have more emotional connection than we currently do. And until we do this, we're going to repeatedly feel like, wow, I'm just not myself. And really, I just can't be me. I keep losing myself. Thank you for listening. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that it was meaningful. I hope that it touched you. And if it did, let me know in the comments. Heads up, I've created a subscription membership here on YouTube. You can more videos like this. This is a little bit of a hybrid video, but I'm moving in the direction. I've done it for years, but I call them process videos, specifically at the end here, talking about, like, ways to start working with it, and really thinking about journaling and voicing language. How would you change these beliefs and this history? Well, those types of videos, the process videos, are what are being offered, and continue to build a new library in that subscription section. So if you're interested, in the description here on this video, I'll have a link to join us in the membership. Thank you so much. I hope that this is helpful, and see you next time.